Indiana Jones and the Diaphragm of Depression. Indiana Jones and the Tampon of Doom. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is a straight-to-Disney Plus movie released in theaters to show the world that Kathleen Kennedy still possesses the ability to keep theater seats empty, no matter what beloved franchise it is that she's trying to destroy. It starts off with the de-aged Indiana Jones who has the voice of an 80-year-old Indiana Jones. If this sounds terrifying, don't worry. It's only within the worthless prologue that lasts 20 minutes, so there's plenty of time to be freaked out by this. Eventually, we board a failed Austrian painter army's train. It's like the Polar Express, but with infinitely less action. And all the action that does happen on this train is clunky and almost useless. Everyone Indy fights is like a Keystone Cop, but it's without the humor. And here we're introduced to Dr. Waller. Not only is he a bad guy because he's a high-ranking official in the failed Austrian painter's army, but also because he's a fucking bore. He has half the Dial of Destiny, a time-traveling device invented by Archimedes, and he's looking for the second piece. He's also a rocket scientist, which makes him a total goober. As soon as the war is over, the US government recruits him to develop rockets that will take astronauts to space, which he totally does for free. And now it's 1969 and Waller wants to get paid. And by getting paid, I mean he wants to 69 the two dial pieces together so he could go back in time and usurp the failed Austrian painter himself. But Indiana Jones isn't having any of it. He totally met the guy and he signed his book. He can't be that bad of a guy after all, can he? When Waller's not killing people with boredom on screen, Indiana Jones is a curmudgeon who falls asleep in front of a TV in a lounge chair, yells at his neighbors, and is defeated by a door slammed in his face. Nothing says adventuring archaeologist more than this. For reference, at the same age, his dad was banging hot Aryan blondes who talk in their sleep.
It's disgraceful. You're old enough to be her grandfather.
I'm as human as the next man.
I was the next man.
Indy teams up with Helena, played by this mole attached to Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who is his goddaughter. She looks like a woman pretending to be a man who's pretending to be a woman. And she's after half of the dial Indy possesses and wants his help. He accepts, but he doesn't know she is a massive piece of shit.
You stole it. And you stole it.
Then I stole it. It's called capitalism.
She wants to sell the dial at an auction, and when she gets half of his dial, she behaves just like you think any feminist would. She ditches him and leaves him to die. Luckily for Indy, Sala drives a cab in New York now, but still has his ear to the ground for the plot. He tells Indy that the writers of the movie said Helena is taking the artifact to an underground antique auction in a very public hotel inside Tangiers. Indy goes to the auction. Helena is there, but so is Waller. And if Waller is involved, it's going to get a lot more boring. There is a fight in the hotel that transitions to a car chase that transitions to me waking up when it's all over. Helena has a Dollar Tree short round following her in this scene, but he's not even a Kung Fu Asian, so this is the only time I'll probably mention him.
Okie dokie, Dr. Jones, hold on to your potato!
Some of this chase is shot on location, but a lot of it you can tell was shot on green screen, never pulling you out of the fact that you know you're watching a movie. They escape, head to Greece, and find a tablet that tells them where the second piece of the dial is. Here they are intercepted by Waller again because he is desperate to prove that he's not a poorly written plug-and-play villain. Indy and Helena don't want to hear it, so they head to Sicily, and we finally get some archaeology. The dial is buried in a tomb within a cave, but hot on their trail is a plot-convenient Waller, as Indy unknowingly leads the way. It's just like The Last Crusade, but for brainlets. Only the impotent man will pass. So Indy doesn't know he's being trailed until he does know. And for knowing, Indy is shot. And for the rest of the movie, he is fading. And by fading, I mean he oscillates from shedding his mortal coil to full fighting capacity with 200% boost in shields. At this point, it all really depends on what the script needs from him. So they hop into the Millennium Falcon, hit the hyperdrive, and go all the way back to 1939. But as everybody knows from high school algebra, if you do not calculate the continental divide, you're not going back to 1939. You're going back to the time of when Archimedes was developing the Dial of Destiny in the middle of a fucking battle. The plane crashes, Waller dies somewhere in that, they shoot a bunch of Romans with a machine gun, and nobody is worried that any of this is going to mess with history going forward. I would like to see how Indy has to explain that there's a failed Austrian painter's plane buried in Sicily for 2,000 years to one of his classes. But we will never get that lesson because Indy decides to die there instead due to the fact that he has nothing to live for. His wife left him, his son ditched him to go die in Vietnam, and he knows his dad at the same age was infinitely cooler.
Let my armies be the rocks and the trees and the birds in the sky.
So Helena Waller-Bridge does the right thing for once. Time travel punches him in the face and brings him back to 1969, where Marion is waiting for him, but his dead son is still dead. The credits roll, and you hate yourself just a little bit more for sitting through it all. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Donk is where the bloated budget train collides with the immovable pile of shit. The entire movie makes you wish that you were watching Crystal Skull again, and I hate it even more for making me say that. For all things being equal, at least Kate Blanchett did marvels with the script she was handed in Crystal Skull. Makes you wonder what went through Matt Mikkelsen's head when accepting this one.
Beautiful ride. Don't know where.
It's a movie that is a lifeless bore, and most of that is due to the script as well as all the multiple reshoots Dial of Derps went through. And honestly, I can't figure out which scenes needed to be reshot. They all seem to be compiled together like a bowl of snot everyone's spitting in. Each scene sort of leads to the next one just because the story has to move forward. But there's no compelling reason why you should be paying attention at all. One minute you're in Greece and the next you're in Sicily just because. You don't feel like you're a part of Indy's adventure at any time, just a third wheel as these people bumble about around the world, all while being a depressing old man or a huge sack of shit of a goddaughter. And that's if they're even in that part of the world, because every location has some kind of CGI element to it. Nothing is tangible. Never once did I think Indy was in danger of losing his head within the volume, and that's really James Mangold's fault. And before I lay into him, I have to say I enjoy most of his prior work. From Copland to 310 to Yuma to Logan to Ford vs. Ferrari, he has an awesome track record. So I can only imagine when Kathleen Kennedy approached him for Dilation of the Despondent, he jumped on the chance with the mentality of, I can fix her. But there is no fixing her, James. She is the great destroyer. And what Mangold has turned in is a sad and depressing Indiana Jones. It's the little things that bothered me about him, like falling asleep in front of a TV. Indiana Jones never struck me as the kind of guy who would own a TV, let alone fall asleep in front of one. And this whole modern thing of deconstructing iconic characters is utter horseshit. Indiana Jones barely had a character arc until Last Crusade. Even then it was subtle and fit nicely with his persona. Now we got to have every hyper-masculine character from the past have feelings and be depressed and talk about stuff. It's gross and it needs to stop. And the pacing of the film is slow. People are going to praise the opening prologue, but I found it to be a boring 20 minutes. It's everything we've seen Indiana Jones do before. He fights failed Austrian painter guys, hops on a train, fights on top of the train, saves his friend, and hops off the train at the very last moment. I found it to be monotonous, with nothing new to add to the franchise at all. The prologue is there to get you remembering who Indiana Jones is, but without any of the heart and soul. The entire film comes at a runtime of 2 hours and 20 minutes, and a good rule of thumb in filmmaking is to get in and get out before anybody notices you made a film. In Dial of Destiny, it's a constant reminder that it's a movie, and that's Mangold's fault. And the look of the film doesn't add up at all. It's too clean looking to be an Indiana Jones movie. The image is too digital, too pristine, too out of the box. The cinematography for the first 3 films by Douglas Slocum plays a lot with shadows. Dark undertones always seem to invade his images at the right time. For scenes shot in the dark, you can tell he built them from black, only lighting what is needed and letting the imagination run wild with the rest of the set pieces. When shooting in the daylight, Slocum made the image feel clear but weathered, as if you were looking at an old map with frayed edges and burn holes in the middle of the paper. In Dial of Disaster, everything is lit bright unless it's to hide the CGI of a de-aged Indy, and you can tell tell this was done out of necessity rather than for style. There is no creative play with the lighting, and that includes when they make it into the cave in Sicily. An opportunity to play with shadows is usually a cinematographer's wet dream. Here in the Dial of Dookie, you can tell they had the creative output of doing the bare minimum, sort of like a 98 Mazda Miata. The costume design is not far off from the cinematography. Every bit of fabric worn by these characters looked like it was put on the moment they started shooting the scene. Nothing seems lived in and used. And this includes Indy's signature hat and jacket. Jesus, these things are supposed to be 5 decades old by now. Everything about this movie feels phoned in, and that includes John Williams' recycled themes from previous Indiana Jones soundtracks. It was a copy and paste job you wouldn't expect to hear from Williams, but there it was, from the theater speakers to your ears. And a lot of times it didn't match up. I shit you not, at one moment the romantic theme from Raiders of the Lost Ark plays over the scene where Indy discusses how he would go back in time to save his son from dying in Vietnam. I'm not sure which emotion they were going for, but they didn't get either out of me. But the worst call was hiring Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who's so ugly her portraits hang themselves. She's about as funny as Amy Schumer telling jokes at your mom's funeral, and she has the charisma of a cinder block in the middle of a Ukrainian battlefield. In short, she's box office repellent. All attempts of humor in the film is through her, and it falls flat on its mole every single time. If they were out to make her the worst sidekick of all time, then the filmmakers managed to get something right. Honestly, I'd rather watch a 2-hour cut of Willie Scott screeching than another scene featuring Helena. And then there's Harrison Ford, who signed off to be a part of all of this. He's a great actor who clearly doesn't give a shit about the characters he launched into being household names. Who hates his characters more, Kathleen Kennedy or himself? It's an honest question because I don't have an answer. At the end of the day, he only cares about how many zeros is on the end of his paycheck. Legacy be damned. Those crashed planes ain't going to pay for themselves. The name Indiana Jones has become synonymous with the adventure genre, much like Star Wars has with sci-fi. So it's only fitting that Indiana Jones has been given the modern Star Wars treatment. And by that I mean Indy's treated like shit throughout his own film and reduced to a withering old man in order to elevate a strong female protagonist. The original Indiana Jones was a love letter to the serial films of the 30s, 40s, and 50s, like Zorro or Secret Service in Darkest Africa. A film trilogy deeply rooted in references to Casablanca, Gunga Din, King Solomon's Mines, and James Bond. Dial of Depends ignores all those foundations and only references its predecessors for member berries or to completely on their legacy. The writers, Kathleen Kennedy and James Mangold, obviously didn't go back and study the foundations of what made Indiana Jones special. Even worse, it feels like they didn't watch any of the prior Indiana Jones films at all. It felt more like they had their assistants read the plot synopsis of the previous 4 films from their Wikipedia page and turned in a 2-sentence breakdown of each film while Kathleen Kennedy was taking a shit in the company bathroom. So do yourself a favor and don't drop a dime to see this movie. Vote with a stolen wallet he stole from you and then she stole it from him and you stole it back from her. It's called capitalism. I'm outta here.
No ticket.